Welcome to Might in Motion, where we help you navigate your personal and professional goals to manifest them into your deserved career and life path. Here at Might in Motion, we don't make excuses, we do the work and go above and beyond. The Might in Motion podcast brings you guests that will help stretch you out of your comfort zone and push you to improve your goals. Tonight, my guest is Maurizio Scrofani. He's an author and supply chain enthusiast. He has spent 30 years in supply chain and supply chain security, so he has seen it all. He's an author. He's also was a professor, and is just an amazing individual who has spent a lot of time investing in his people and his teams. He was the co-founder and president of CargoNet, one of the leading and award-winning supply chain risk management companies. And he has leads multiple thought initiatives, is a leader in initiatives in our industry when it comes to anything in supply chain. He's been published in international and national supply chain, insurance, loss prevention, security, and risk management publications. When I say this man has done it all, he truly has. I am so excited to be able to talk with him this evening and bring him to all of you at Might in Motion. Maurizio, welcome.
It's good to see you, Mariana. It is good to see you, Mariana.
It is so awesome to be able to spend time with you this evening.
Thank you.
We've had the pleasure to work together, and that was an amazing experience. Mm-hmm. You bring so much to the table with all of your 30 years in supply chain and in supply chain security. You've written books. You've done all kinds of cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe share with the group one of like the highlights of your past 30 years that you just love? Like it's your favorite part of supply chain?
Oh my God, what a good question, huh? The part that I loved about supply chain that actually was an eye-opening experience for me was how it's actually the way in which problems are solved. If you're not an engineer and if you're not a Six Sigma person, you quickly learn that there is a formula to solve anything. Because a great engineer starts with A and ends with Z. And if they can follow, even if they don't know what it is, they put them, you drop them in the middle of somewhere, that engineer is going to solve it. Now, they might not know what you and I know, but they'll eventually get to the same answer or better. And that was the aha moment for me when I was in supply chain, because I learned how to be a very methodical, practical, intentional solution guy. Yeah. And then after you solve it, you begin to dream about the stuff, right? Because then it's like, all right, well, if I can fix that one with everybody, then why aren't we thinking about this? Why aren't we thinking about that? So I would say that probably was the transformational moment for me in supply chain was, holy cow, look at the way they think through it. And I fell in love with it.
I think what's really cool about that is that you don't actually have to be an engineer to have that mindset. You don't have to necessarily have a supply chain degree. There's so much that people learn from actually the doing that I love. I've been on teams where I've reported to people that have a high school diploma, but they are the best damn supply chain thinkers that I have ever met, right? Totally. They know how to get a box from one box to another. That's how I always think about it, right? You're putting a box on a truck, which looks like a box, and it's going to another box, which is a warehouse, just big old square, right? So at the end of the day, you're moving boxes. Totally. How did you get into supply chain security and that whole crazy world?
Wow. It's a story. So as a young fella, I won't, very young.
We were all young ones.
Yeah, right. I was in high school, so I was looking for part-time work, and Garden State Plaza in Paramus, New Jersey. I went there with my cousin, and I applied at JCPenney's. And I got a job as a cashier, and I saw guys talking into their shirts and jackets, and I was trying to figure out if there was something wrong with them until I was introduced to them, and they were the security people. Back then they were called security, and they were catching shoplifters, and I couldn't do that job because I was one of the youngest kids in high school. I graduated, I was 16 or 7. I was a young guy. You have to be 18 years old to be in security to sign a complaint at the police department when you catch a bad guy. So I had to wait, and I finally got in it. And then I learned that wasn't really the the end game, because when you looked at the amount of loss a store had, it wasn't all shoplifting. So I started
Mhm.
digging and learning and studying. And then security went to inventory control, and inventory control went into inventory management. And that was boom, right? That's like, holy cow, what's all this stuff? And inventory management converted to planning and allocation. Planning allocation moved into transportation, and then the rest is history. So
Yeah.
that was the story, and the rest is just watching great people do great things, learning from them, first as a spectator, then as a contributor, and then as the quarterback.
That's awesome. I've seen you lead teams, and one of the things that I'm really passionate about as I'm developing young leaders, people who are moving from individual contributors into manager type roles, is how do you develop a servant leadership mindset? Sometimes that transition of being an individual contributor is hard to shake. It's hard to not be the one that does it all, right?
Mhm.
And being able to convert to actually want to take care of your people.
Yeah.
How have you coached others on having that mindset of servant leadership, and what does it mean to you?
Another great question. I have to think about that because I want to make sure it's comprehensive. So if I think out loud, just bear with me. Um, Most importantly, what I learned was you must be present.
Mhm.
So the conversation you're having with a person, you should not be waiting to speak. You should be present, and you should be able to absorb everything. And I always talk about two things: listening with your ears and hearing with your heart, because I think that combination can be super helpful. And the second piece is studying the individual and learning their tells, because there's always a conversation within the conversation. Because some people are afraid to say what needs to be said because they're insecure, or they don't want you to know, they're not sure about what they're doing. And I love the phrase "small feet, big shoes."
Mhm.
I love hiring those people because you can watch them grow, develop, and they don't bring any bad habits, and they can teach you quite a bit about humility over time. So those are the things that taught me to lead from the bottom up, because if you're present, you're listening to all the ideas. If you make sure you're not waiting to speak, the American problem, you're quiet but you're waiting to speak because you didn't hear a word they said. If you can actually hear everything they're saying, you'll realize that there's exponential value in every single word, because you're either going to learn something about yourself or you're going to learn something about them, but you're definitely going to be able to design and define what the next step is in the conversation, and then how that brings everyone together, right? So that's where I would start. And then of course it's really testing out what this is. This could be nothing more than a hypothesis. You could be wrong, maybe there's a different way, but as you kind of walk through it, you realize it's not a hypothesis. It's actually a very good working solution, formula. And then from there, when you test it out, you begin to teach it. And as you
Mhm.
teach it, you watch people grow into phenomenal leaders, right? I was spoiled. I got to watch you kick butt and take names. So I know and I didn't teach you anything. You were just awesome at it, right? Like, you've got that skill. But I got to see a gentleman that was an AP manager in the West Coast get promoted up the ranks. And most recently, he was a formal speaker at RELA. And that for me was a milestone, a personal milestone,
Yeah.
because I remember how important it was to deliver the message with empathy and transparency. And he was one of those guys that really latched on, listened, heard, felt, spoke, and taught. So that's probably where those things come together. And then making sure that you quickly realize where there's a problem.
Mhm.
Because when you start building your team, good people gravitate to one another. And sometimes, your team of 300, 400, 4,000, you'll have 2, 3, 4, 5 problems that are cancers. And, you have two options. You have one is to develop up or manage out. But what interestingly happens that I've seen over time, critical mass pushes them out. You don't have to do anything,
Yeah.
because the amount of love that you have inside of a team, right? My old team of, I used to use a phrase, the 400. That was probably my first gigantic family that means the world to me. And we might have had one or two bad apples, but that group of 4, 5, 6, 700 at the end worked it out, and they moved that out because there was no place for that. So servant leadership becomes contagious to the point where it defines the subculture within the company. So
Yeah.
if you think about a company as a habitat, inside of a habitat, you have multiple biomes, right? So you are basically the developer of a biome that has to tie in perfectly seamlessly to a habitat. And that is a good thing, not a bad thing, because it just strengthens and solidifies the value of the overall habitat that was created. Some call it the ecosystem, whatever. But that's where the servant leadership bleeds everywhere. And before you know it, you run a super powerful reverse pyramid that comes up with super clear, crisp, excellent ideas that change the dynamics of the company.
Yeah, and what I think is cool is that when you're building that trust, and to your point earlier where you talk about you're listening, you're not listening just to create an argument, you're listening to listen. You help somebody create a plan, like you mentioned, you're seeing an individual grow, right, to a point where they're presenting. And those of you who don't know what RELA is, it's a pretty large conference and it's a pretty big deal to go present on stage, right? That takes a lot of courage just to begin with. You're creating a dynamic where people are like, wow, I'm being invested in. Somebody is concerned about me and my development. Because at the end of the day, we all care about ourselves, right? But when a team member feels that way, they are actually more inclined to give back to others. And you start seeing them support each other, right? On, hey, let me help you win, instead of a competition against each other. It's like us against the world, right? But then also, as you mentioned, people kind of work themselves out or improve because you've got that level of honesty going on.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
If that makes sense.
It does. It totally does. Yeah.
So, we've talked a little bit, in the past I think it was in one of your books, if I remember correctly, but you had this really interesting story about Peacock to Feather Duster. And it really stuck with me because sometimes we come in and we just want to show. We want to show, I know everything, right? And this story really resonated with me. I don't know if it would resonate with others, but do you mind kind of sharing what Peacock to Feather Duster means? And maybe, hey, how can you avoid that giant pitfall in your career?
Yeah. So I learned that phrase from a great man who has known me since I was 23 and has been my mentor. He's been a lot of great things to me. His name is Gene. He's in the loss prevention field. And I used that phrase when he had taught it to me based on an example that I sat through when I was young, pretty young. It was my second or third year in senior leadership. And, you get invited to the boardroom. And for most people, that's like, it's like you kind of made it, right? People are like, oh, I'm in the boardroom. Mm-hmm. Not always a good thing, right? So I'm sitting there. I'm the youngest guy. I had black hair at the time. And the person that was revered and loved by many, there were 9 people. And he was obviously one of them. And he was not at the head of the table. He was at the side because he was that kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And the person at the head of the table was sharp, but, everyone knew he was kind of cunning. And he started the drumbeat. And little by little, you began to see the attention go to this gentleman that was a wonderful guy. And he didn't see it coming. And no one did anything about it. So he went, by the time the meeting was over, he was turned into dust. And he was dead man walking. Mm-hmm. Like he didn't even know that it happened. He didn't see it coming. And that happens at times because there's just hubristic leaders that I call narcissistic sociopaths. Mm. And if you don't see it coming, it'll happen, right? So there was a good guy, great guy, smart guy, had a bunch of people that loved him. And by the way, he left. He got picked up in 6 months, a year. And now he's like CEO, retired. He's somewhere on a boat sailing the world, whatever. He's doing really well. But I think what happened there was, one day you're walking on water, the next day you're done.
Yeah.
and I'm sure you and I both know people that are really good people, super talented, that the worst part of that, when you peacock feather duster and you're out and about, you find out where your alliances are. You learn the definition of friendship and authenticity, right? So,
Yeah.
that's one of those things where peacock to feather duster can teach a person, oh my God, is that what that means? Holy cow, look at what just happened. But then, long term, you figure out it's a good thing because you were not supposed to be that organization's person.
Mm-hmm.
And that peacock position, some people prefer to say peacock is more of a cocky. That's really not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be you're on top and then you're done. And that's really what that little
Yeah.
snippet right in the book is about. And I hope that those people that do read that book realize the end of the book is all about good guys do finish first, not last.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about how things happen, but it doesn't mean everything turns out badly, because I'm a big proponent of the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, is always conspiring to move you in the direction of where you need to be. And when you're fighting that, that's when you start getting like the conflict, the trouble, the issues in your life, right?
Mhm.
And so sometimes you get a swift kick in the rear end, right? It says, no, you haven't been listening to the messages. And then bigger doors, bigger opportunities,
Mhm.
things that actually might drive much larger personal fulfillment in your life and growth will happen because of it. I mean, you talk about your friend, you saw that with that individual, obviously moving on to bigger and badder things and on a yacht now, right? That may look differently for other people, right? It might be, hey, now I'm running my own company, or now I'm, investing more time into my family and my kids that before I would never have thought I could let go, right, of the title or the rungs of the ladder. But letting go of it actually is creating way more value in your life.
Totally spot on.
So, you've led different teams, you've moved to different companies throughout your career.
Yep.
When you come into a new team or you're coming into a new company, how do you go about establishing an environment of trust with these new teams that maybe you've never had the opportunity to interact with before because you're brand new?
Mhm. So I, I basically, I'll tell you how I think about it. You know, um, a traditional consultant walks in and goes through discovery,
Mm-hmm.
and discovery is all about listening. But you're cataloging, you're creating logic clusters. How things are supposed to work. But what I do is I run them in parallel. So if you're going to run discovery, you're running discovery on the business. So let's do it people, process, technology, right? If you're going to do the people part, there's the work stuff and then there's the culture stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to go through formal discovery, there's the stuff you put in writing, which is so important because, okay, this is role and routine, this is strength, this is weakness. I get it. That's the type of manager I have in front of me, blah, 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 right? Then in my journal, what I do is I reflect on the conversation and I begin to say, okay, this is how the person consumes these phrases. This is how the person responds to that type of pressure. This is how the person engages. Like you begin to, I'm not going to use the word profile, but you start understanding where your lines are, where your boundaries are by person. And then you build relationships at the person level while not discounting the team culture
Yeah.
and making sure that you're aligning with your supervisor and the group you support. So, for example, if you're running an operation in supply chain, everything outside of supply chain is a relationship, but not a go get it done, right? However, you got to keep that at an arm's length. But if you report outside of supply chain, then you've got to make sure your head is on a swivel, because everybody that you support here is not necessarily the group that aligns with all of that, because it could be a different culture. So you have to pay attention to that. And if you don't, then you can get yourself in a position where you're in the middle of the fight between the two groups, right? So finance has oversight of supply chain, You've got to
Yep.
make sure you can, like in one of my old companies, we reported up to finance.
Mm-hmm.
Finance has a different perspective than an operator. So you've got to be able to make sure you get that right. So you're almost running multiple people discovery operations at the same time for up to 3 different verticals, even though you're only responsible for the one. So that's how I start my day. Sometimes it's quick, and sometimes you can, believe it or not, you can bolt on to your external vertical partners faster than your own, because there's a something that fits better. There's a cerebral connectivity, an emotional connectivity, whatever it is. But that's kind of the way that I've been thinking about stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about how there's so many different players, and no matter what company you're at, if you're in supply chain, technology, anything really, you're always dealing with different personalities. You're dealing with different motives, and to get things done, you have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to give a little bit, take a little bit.
Mhm.
I my entire career, I always kind of go back to the Godfather, right? Like, I'm going to do you a favor, but someday I'm probably going to come to you and ask for a favor in return. And, when you talked earlier about alliances, that also popped into my head, because then, like when you go back and you're saying, hey, I need help, I need some reciprocation, you learn really, really quickly who's on your side, if you will, and who you can bring along with you, not only to help your success, but to help somebody else's success, right? How do you approach maybe negotiation and getting alignment across multiple platforms when sometimes, for example, finance may not understand what a store operator might be thinking, who may not understand a distribution point of view? How do you take your experiences and help people see the bigger picture?
You speak their language, because the message I have to deliver to finance about what I want is going to be different than the message I have to deliver to operations based on what I want, right? So when I say I want, I speak for my team.
Mm-hmm.
So there's X amount of people behind me, they need something. And let's just say that for many years, nothing has been done for this specific team. So you begin to see how all of the other teams navigate. You study those wins because they have a very good work product that gives them a yes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you gain a mastery in that message. But the only way to gain a mastery in that message, which is above them because it's not to them, is to then be able to say to them, here's what I need from you. Here's what I need from you. And as you build your document for the people above them, because you've studied it and now you have a mastery, that's the only way to do it. I have to speak French to you, German to him, English to them, right? And when I get all of that put together to tell the story, which is a transparent, extremely vulnerable, right? That's the other part, vulnerability. We should talk about that at some point. You have to present that and win. Now, I'm a believer that a slow yes is better than a quick no. So if we have to, if you've got to go through 15 renderings to get it one step forward, that's okay, because I play the long ball, not the short one. So I think that's probably the safest way. And sometimes you do have to crack a couple of eggs to make an omelet. And I've done that because, when you represent a lot of people, there's might not be a lot of time for political nonsense. So you juggernaut it through sometimes, but not all the time, only when you have to.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to evaluate the situation and what's appropriate and what's not, right? Like,
Correct.
sometimes brute strength force has to happen, right?
Once in a while.
Right.
Once.
Like, I try to approach things for the most part, not having to do that. Now, I will tell you, there's probably people on my team that have seen me get a little bit like fired up, and it's just like when you get to a point where like, I've had enough, like, we got to move the needle. Right.
Yeah.
I had one guy on my team. He's like, I knew the one moment I didn't like that I had crossed the line. He's like, your eyes shifted and like you could see it bubbling over. I'm like, yeah,
the vein came out of your neck.
I was like, and hopefully it'll never happen again. But now you know what my tell is when I'm about to like blow my lid, right?
I've seen it.
You have. But I try.
I was a spectator.
It's always more fun to be on the sidelines.
Yes.
but that's kind of, when you mentioned vulnerability,
Yeah.
sometimes that's like, hey, be completely transparent and vulnerable. Like sometimes you lose your cool, right? And being able to come back to the table and being like for me, like, hey, if I think I did it in a wrong way, I'm going to go back and apologize. If I didn't, I'm not going to apologize because I'm not sorry, right? Like sometimes you just gotta you gotta push it, right? So
Yeah.
what does vulnerability mean to you when you're talking about it from that professional sense, that team collaboration sense?
Yeah. So this is a sensitive topic. Vulnerability to me is so important when it's real.
Mm-hmm.
If you show vulnerability to a person you report to and they take total advantage of it, you will never do it again, right?
Correct.
However, that's a mistake because what happens then is that by not being vulnerable, the people you work with, and I don't care about the word for because everyone works with you, right? Big title,
Yep.
little title, it doesn't matter. Those people are going to really get to know you. They're going to understand that you may not necessarily say things the right way, but you have no ill will intentions.
Mm-hmm.
So by being vulnerable and them understanding, that's just the way, Mariana talks when she gets fired up, like, and you move on. But some people will take that as a tool to injure.
Yeah.
And thank God there's not many of those, but I have met one
Mm-hmm.
that you probably, if I had to redo it all over in my head again, I would have never been, you know, completely vulnerable with that person because they took advantage of it.
Yeah.
But you talk to thousands of people over the course of 30 years, and if you only meet one piece of garbage, it's okay.
That tells me that you're probably in some pretty good circles.
Totally.
Right? Like
Totally.
that's what's important. So I know we're getting kind of close to time, but I really want to ask you this question. So Maurizio, if you can go back 10 years,
10.
talk to yourself, what advice would you give you?
Go faster.
Ooh, I like that.
You got to sprint.
Why go faster? What does that
You
mean?
it means you got to sprint the marathon
Mm-hmm.
because the amount of time you have and the amount of things you want to dream about are limited because there's not, time is, like, I was kidding around. I had black hair when I saw this thing happen, right? But I can see it as if it happened yesterday. So I would say, go faster because 10 years ago, I was 43. 43 was different.
Yeah.
53 is totally different. I'm sure 63 will be just as, exciting as the last 10 years. So I would say sprint the marathon because first of all, the world is moving faster than it did in my last 30 years, right? Technology is dictating difference. We're talking about social scoring. When I was a kid, there was no such thing. Like what's the social scoring? So I also think there's so much more to learn because of the internet. It's a phenomenal multi-node connectivity point where if you're not sure, you can be sure. Of course, you have fake stuff everywhere, but for the most part, if it's scientific, mathematical, you can learn stuff quickly. And then if I can do that all over again, I probably would have invested quite a bit of time in the YouTubes of the world, like let's call it streaming video learning, because now you can get on there and basically learn an entire college education at the speed of thought because things are compressed. They're right to the point. The average person, their attention span is 16 minutes. So imagine if everything is delivered to you in 15 minutes, you totally consume it. Complicated stuff is made easy, right? So I would say go faster because maybe you could have tripped over something that would have catapulted specific industries into behaving differently and being better at what they are.
Yeah. I love it. I just, the same thing. Time keeps on moving. And what do you have to lose? Right. That could be move faster in personal, move faster in your professional, whatever you want to call it, whatever is important for you from, your particular goal. Why not do it?
Exactly.
Right. Because it can only help you. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I know I've got your website up here. for people to follow. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Is that one of the best ways for folks to reach out to you, learn about, what you've written, some of the blogs you're doing, all that kind of new good stuff?
Sure. And also LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn profile that I have that I've got somewhere out there, I'm sure.
It's somewhere in the ether. Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you again for joining us. This was awesome. And I really appreciate your time and what the wisdom that you shared with the audience today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into Might in Motion. If you learned something about motivation, momentum, mindfulness, or might, please like, comment, and share. Thank you.